Alright, hello everyone, Nick's here. Uh, I'm gonna record I'm doing a little video about Linux and whether or not you would like to go move to it. Um, Little thing I wrote up in a day or two, but I do have a friend, uh, who is debating about switching to Linux or not. So they might ask questions, they might not. Um, I'll be reading off a script. They will not. They can introduce themselves whenever they're ready to.
Yeah, my name is Tom Paradox. Uh, so I have a many different alter stuff. It's complicated. Just call me Tom.
All right. And what pronouns do you go by?
Mostly her.
Okay. Perfect. Make sure I get that up. All right. I'm gonna start off. So first off, I have no problem with Linux. That doesn't mean you should get it, or hell, even not get it. This video will be for the people who are on edge of switching either due to Windows 10 being going out of support and or not wanting to get Windows 11, or those who are on Windows 11 and done with the bullshit that's happening between stuff with SSDs getting borked and all that fun stuff that kind of has been resolved now, but might not be. Or those who want like a second OS to run outside, like on a second laptop or like a non main computer, especially something that's very old, then, or just to fiddle around with. So let's start for the
Yeah,
easy. What?
yeah, that makes sense. Um, I've been thinking about switching to Linux because I'm honestly really tired of Windows stuff. They keep adding like software that you can't get rid of.
I think,
Bloatware.
yeah, there are ways to get rid of some of the bloatware. I think Windows 11 Mini is an option, but I'm not entirely sure about that. My two main OSs are Linux and Mac OS. Mac OS is exclusively for editing and creative stuff. Linux is my main gaming and main actual computer stuff I use. Um, but we'll start off with the more relatable topic first, the OS. Depending on what OS you use, you'll experience different. I'm still technically newer to it. I have been using it for a couple years. However, that couple years was on a MacBook Air. Um, so realistically, I've been using it for my main thing for about a month, give or take. Um, I'm only talking about the three I have experience with, those being Triskel 11, Linux Mint, and Fedora KDE Plasma. All of them are fine and have valid problems. We'll start off with Triskel 11. First off, it aims to be a fully free software slash firmware based in Ubuntu, meaning a lot of the stuff you already might have might not work. So fully free software means it is, if you have like paid drivers or something like that, you might not be able to like use it. So you might have to completely reconfigure your entire like PC if you use Triskel 11. I don't mind it, but it's not that big. I gotta.
Uh, So with that sort of setup, would it be more difficult to get games to work and other software?
It Yes, kind of. It Steam works on there perfectly fine, like it does any other Linux program. It's just Triskel is a bit more different. I'll kind of it's You have to, if you use, for instance, let's say a MacBook Air, you cannot use the built-in Wi-Fi card. You have to buy a USB Wi-Fi adapter, and it has to be a very specific one because not all of them work because it has to be fully free. And fully free is a bunch of bullshit a lot of times, sadly, so it's annoying.
That's a little irritating.
It is. On to another OS that's also based in Ubuntu Linux Mint, which is the most common Linux I've seen people use, myself included. It's very user friendly, very much easy to just run on essentially anything. And with all of these, you'll always notice a boost in performance from Windows, no matter what. Like, the only ones you might not is if you're running something like Windows XP. If you're running Windows XP, I'm more impressed than anything. But it Linux Mint perfect for browsing, watching videos, which is, I assume, if you're not gaming, I'm kind of talking to people who just use it for web browsing, for watching videos, for doing casual stuff. Linux probably is most known that I know of for installing, and unlike Triskel, it's not only the free software that's supported. You can use your MacBook Air perfectly fine. I'm using MacBook Air because it's the thing I've used Linux Mint on as well. So all the Wi-Fi card is already available on it, so you can just use that instead of USB dongle, which will probably slow down speeds. The OS is relatively customizable. Mint and Triskel to me feel kind of Windowsy, not in the bloatware aspect, but in the it. There are certain distros that have everything at the top, like how Apple does, and then there's certain ones that have at the bottom, like how Windows does. Mint is also very customizable. You can change your icons, you can change your themes. If you want, you can change pretty much anything. Onto Fedora KDE. So this is the one I'm currently running my PC on. Like my actual main PC I stream with, I game with, I do pretty much everything outside of video editing and a couple other things. I went with the Fedora-based version over Ubuntu for a few more reasons. One of them, right now, one of them would being it sounded fun to learn something different. Honestly,
Yeah,
um,
honestly, it does sound really interesting.
yeah. So Fedora and Ubuntu and Debian and Arch, I think, are the four main actual like distributions of it, or like bases you can get, and then there's different stuff based in it. So Fedora, you have some different terminologies you have to learn in your command prompt to install certain things. Uh, so there's a few other things. I like Fedora KDE, and I like KDE in general because it feels like Windows 10 in the good ways, so it feels like Windows 7 in the good ways. That you can and you can add it's feel I've customized it a lot. So for instance, I have the taskbar on my main window with my apps, with what is showing on my displays, and then I have volume controls, my Stream Deck stuff, any updates I have available, some minor disk usage, Wi-Fi usage, and then I think CPU usage. And then on my right monitor, because I do a dual monitor setup, I have an analog clock, a system thing to do, and then I have my upload and download speed, some of my temps, volume thing, whether or not my webcam's in use. I have disk utilization. I have more Wi-Fi. I have my core usage for individual memory, network speed, CPU usage, a little weather icon to show if it's sunny or not where I live. I have my GPU clock, my RAM, and then whatever is like most recently used on my for apps on there too, so I can just open apps that way.
Hmm.
And there is more stuff. You can change your like icon themes for your apps and your applets and all that. Even your boot up screen and that stuff, which might not always work, but you can change it to be if you really wanted to. You could make your entire like Linux thing look like you're running Mac OS, even though you're not. And that's what I kind of have is all my icons are Mac OS based because even though I don't necessarily like Mac OS a ton, I love the icons. I like what it feels like because that's what I grew up on. Is I grew up on Mac OS.
Yeah, that makes
Uh,
sense.
I I don't know entirely all the ones you could find, but I'm sure you could find if you wanted a something from Windows XP, you could probably find stuff for Windows XP. And what come, and of course, all these options and whatnot. But I think what comes down, especially compared to Windows 10 11s, is it runs far better, especially idly. Like I can see like 30% CPU and RAM usage idly, but like even then, I do have a Stream Deck. I have a Game Boy emulator that is like one of those physical ones. So like of course my stuff will be taken up a little bit more because I have extra stuff plugged in. But
Hmm.
like you use less resources when you're in Linux versus something like Windows. You're not using half your RAM and half your CPU just because Windows wants to take it.
Yeah, that would actually be really beneficial to someone like me,
Yeah.
as I do a lot of stuff regarding 3D modeling.
Oh yeah, so we'll get into that stuff in a bit. Actually, we have a lot of art stuff that we'll talk about in a sec. Um, and for bloatware, there is none. Like the only stuff installed right away in Linux is usually LibreOffice, which is essentially just Office 365, but entirely free. And there's a couple other stuff. It's usually stuff that takes up kilobytes of space, maybe, and then maybe megabytes of space. Nothing bigger than like maybe 500 megabytes of space per app. It's very small. It's very easy. Like you can, if you can do this in a pretty easy setup. Also, you don't need Wi-Fi to set it up. Like for updates and everything, you will need that Wi-Fi, but like realistically, all you need is a USB stick. And I'll link to the websites for all the distros I'm talking about in the description. But just go on those websites, pull up the one you want, put it on a USB stick, and you can do. If you don't want to install on your hard drive, Linux also has a live environment, which means it just runs off the USB stick. That's how little it needs.
Hmm. That's pretty good. I always knew about how um the main difference is the lack of bloatware.
Yeah, there is other stuff that I'll talk about later in too about like gaming and all that stuff. But for like, we'll move on to browsing the web because I think that's a pretty good thing to talk about. Is everyone does it, right? We browse the web.
Mhm.
We all do it sometimes a little too much, albeit. Um, all versions of Linux come with Firefox or Firefox-based browser. So some of them will be like Firefox, but like it's in a different copy. And if you are anti AI, Firefox does use AI. However, because Linux, a lot of the stuff that you can do is also in Linux. So you can get, if you really want to, you could get Google Chrome. I wouldn't recommend it. But you can get. I use something called WaterFox, which is a Firefox clone. It uses far less CPU, and it's essentially this Firefox in a different font.
Huh.
There are other ones, and like usually when I'm browsing the web, I usually have a tab open on YouTube. I have something else open, and like a couple other tabs, and like sometimes I'll be browsing the Apple site, which is also very resource intensive for some ungodly reason. But now this is using my PC specs. So if you have a very beefy PC, this won't matter at all because realistically, if your PC is better than a Ryzen 5 3600 and an RX 6700 with 32 gigs of RAM, realistically, most of the stuff I will say is stuff Windows would have been fine with either way, and Linux would be even better with. If you run less than that, that's where it's kind of like, hey, make sure you track everything. If you especially use something like an old Dell Inspiron, but and daily tasks are all part of our life with work, school, or at home. Linux won't suddenly have major issues, or even hell, you can have it install your updates while the computer is on, and you don't have to restart it if you really want. Like, even then, you can still restart and whatnot to do updates, but it won't force you to install updates whenever you. If you want, you could do. You could. There's a setting in Linux, most Linux, where you can be like, yeah, I want updates once a month. That's it, and then you don't get updates for a month and be like, hey, new updates for a month. If you want them every day, yeah, there's ones for every day. It entirely changes. And kind of onto the artists now for browsing the web, running it, using it as a kind of home thing. I would recommend it if you just use Blender. If you're only using Blender and you use Krita, perfectly fine then. Most Blender and Krita are native to Linux and work perfectly fine.
What
But
about Paint Tool Sci?
what about what?
Paint Tool Sci.
Paint Tool Sty. I don't know what that is. Let me look it up.
It's SAI.
Let me open my browser to see that. It is Paint Tool Sci. From the looks of it, I mean, you might be able to run it on Wine or something like that. I'm not sure as I've never used it. The stuff I have used is for video editing. I use Final Cut Pro X. For art and that stuff, I use Clip Studio Paint. Um, I have a lot of Apple stuff that I have an Apple computer for, and Blender works perfectly fine on here and all that. But Blender is always limited to whatever your PC is, never not OS usually. The other native app
Right.
for drawing is GIMP. I don't like it because it's not very intuitive, but someone might like it and find it fun. I
Uh, so does the Clip Studio Paint run on it? Well,
Clip Studio Paint does not run on Linux at all, actually.
Ah,
Uh,
all
that's
right.
that's why I run a two PC setup. Is I have my PC for pretty much everything, and then I have my PC for editing videos, and then doing art stuff. It's a creative thing, and that's Mac. But
Oh, that makes sense.
yeah, if
I I might switch to that type of setup eventually, like maybe with my laptop or something.
I was gonna say laptops are very interesting. I'm not here to talk about Mac OS though. Um, I was gonna
I
say
was just talking about having
Linux
it as my base with the
with Linux, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
without the Linux.
If you're
Yeah.
going to school, most likely college, realistically, uh, like I said, Aris, make sure the apps you have are available in Linux before you even download it, because there are a lot of apps that
Mhm.
won't work in Linux. I know, trust me. Well, you love it. You need to learn how to get around things, whether that software runs on Wine or running on something called Bottles, or not running at all, and it's a very wonky experience sometimes. So if you are someone who cannot has a hard time with either with some of the weird stuff online or gets frustrated easily, Linux might not be good for you. Like once you get it set up, it's perfectly fine. But getting it set up, that's the problem where it's like, yeah, kind of wait for a second to figure it out.
So what you're saying is that someone could just totally Uncle Iroh it, you know?
What?
Uncle Iroh it. They guide the person for it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then once that's over, then they can just do their own thing.
Yeah, exactly. You can so here's one of the things I'll say you kind of need is you need people who know how to run Linux natively and can help you through it. I would recommend if you are not if you're comfortable enough, write down command prompts, write down what you're doing so you know what you did in case you have to do it again. Right, now onto gaming. The thing everyone's probably watching this video for, realistically. Um, 90% of games will run because of Steam. The Steam Deck did incredible things for Linux. I remember back when I first installed Linux into my laptop, I looked at the games. I saw 5 out of my 200 games on there, and they were games that were already native to Linux beforehand. Um, 99% of games will be like play of those 9%. Almost all of them will have no problems. There's a couple that you have to figure out some workarounds with, but that's just because of how it launches the game. But those 10% are usually AAA games, stuff like EA or Ubisoft games. A lot of games with easy anti cheat, if they haven't configured it for Linux and need kernel level access, will just not run. So COD, Battlefield, Mirror's Edge, sadly as well, will just not run, which sucks. And then for drivers, real quick, is just a little side off for people. AMD drivers are natively supported on Linux, so that's the neat part is they're already installed with it, so you're always up to date on the drivers. I Nvidia, from what I've heard, you need to install them separately. I don't entirely know everything for it, as I until Nvidia gets rid of that 12-pin connector, I refuse to touch an Nvidia card unless it's given absolutely free in a separate PC. That's also free. Just because it's not because I hate Nvidia, it's because I don't like fire hazards. Uh, Steam games can be finicky too. Even you might have to change what version of Proton you're using. Games not installed in Steam because Steam is in Linux. EA, what's it? Epic Games and GOG are not native to Linux, so they're not on Linux. You can get them through different stuff, and then they'll run perfectly fine. But you kind of have to figure that way around it. If you don't really trust yourself, or if you play a lot of games that require easy anti-cheat, and you know they won't work on Linux, I would recommend stay with Windows. Honestly, Windows will be the best bet for you in that case. Into retro gaming, or rather emulation.
About that, didn't you say that there was a way to emulate like Windows software?
Yeah, there is. So there's multiple ways.
So would you be able to do that and run something that only runs on Windows?
Yes, technically. Some stuff won't work in VMware, but there's something called Wine and then Bottles. Bottles is Wine. It's just a way to run multiple instances at once of it, and it's a little bit easier to use. Steam also has a version of Wine called Proton, which usually works as well. That's a little bit more finicky sometimes. Sometimes using the major releases work perfectly fine. Sometimes you have to use Proton Experimental or Hotfix to even get it working. And even then it might not work fully. Into the retro gaming though, if you play a lot of emulator games or games like Wii U and earlier, let's say, Linux ironically is a really good thing to use for emulation. So I have something called a GB operator. It basically, what it does is any physical cartridges you have, I can fully put them inside my operator because that's just a basically Game Boy cartridge that you can put Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance games in. They have their own proprietary or their own software that just runs on everything. You can put that in. You can write, save, view if it's an official card or not, and so you can also put cheat codes in there as well as if you're having a game view. RetroArch is supported natively on Linux too, which means realistically you have access to everything emulation wise. There is a app called Flatpak, which is essentially just like the App Store on both Mac and Windows. That you can just kind of search up stuff and see if it's on there. If it's not, you can search up in your browser. Be like, hey, I want XYZ on Linux. Someone probably has on GitHub, or it's out there. Prop. I have yet to try Dolphin. Even though I've had this script up for like 2 weeks, I have not tried Dolphin because I don't emulate a whole lot of games, and when I do, it's usually Game Boy games or Game Boy Advance games. That's what I like to play.
I've used Dolphin before. The Dolphin is actually pretty good. I've used it to play Twilight Princess.
I've used Dolphin before, not on Linux. So I don't know if it runs on Linux, is what I'm saying.
I see.
So I don't want to say I'm doing something and then it might not. Okay, so before we get into any questions, here's my conclusion, my opinions from everything we've done. At the end, I have a love-hate relationship with Linux, honestly. A lot of stuff that is very normally plug and play. For instance, a Stream Deck. that works perfectly in Windows and Mac OS does not work natively in Linux because their app isn't for Linux. You have to do configuring and get it working. If you're someone who has a hard time with online forums and don't have a support group that knows Linux well, and you also struggle with with the hurdles, and there's been several times where you just say fuck it and go back, do my own struggle. I've had a lot of times where I've almost said fuck it and gone back to Windows to just not deal with setup. Because there's sometimes I just want something to work and it doesn't. With my Game Boy operator, it very much did not want to work even though it totally could. It's very interesting. Once you get past the first few days or weeks of setup, the reason I say weeks is honestly, sometimes you realize you thought you installed everything and like within the first few days of it, and then a few weeks later, you forgot. Oh, I forgot to install this. So a few weeks is not really true. It's usually the first day or two. You have it installed. You got pretty much everything set up, unless you don't really know what you're doing. It's not bad. You can learn and run and realize your computer actually runs better than you realize it would outside of Windows. If you're someone who wants to get into Windows genuinely, as for reason of because you have an old computer or you really wanna you wanna de you really want to de-Googlefy and de-Windows your life, or de-Microsoft your life even, I would recommend either Mint or KDE, either Fedora, or there is KDE Plasma, which is just Ubuntu based. I think there's also an Arch version. I will never recommend Arch for beginners because that is like a full on, like, you need to at least have learned Linux for a while. Both Mint and KDE Plasma are very easy, beginner friendly. There's a lot of guides. Fedora KDE I would recommend if you have time, if you have patience, and you know what you're doing already. Because honestly, the only difference between KDE Plasma and Fedora KDE is what they're running on. Fedora KDE runs on Fedora, KDE Plasma runs on Ubuntu. And remember when I said to come back to Driscoll? This is it. We need to talk about it. It is annoying. It's a pain in my ass. It is not for someone who doesn't know what they're doing, especially as their first time. I had to buy a new Wi-Fi adapter for my computer to have Wi-Fi. I have that adapter. It sucks ass. Because the Wi-Fi card that was in the computer isn't supported because Driscoll is free only. So you can't do certain stuff. If you're on a computer that you know everything is free software and hardware, I don't really know how to describe it. There's going to be a Wikipedia link for what I read with Driscoll and all that stuff. I would, if you really want to try it, go for it. I will not stop you. I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to say what I like, what I hate. Well, a lot of stuff works great or better on Linux overall. It feels better. I'm not skipping frames as much. I'm not missing certain frames. I mean, if I'm running Cyberpunk, yeah, I'm gonna miss some frames from running ultra high, but like, there are bugs in Linux that aren't on Windows. For instance, House Flipper 2. I don't know if it still has a bug, but it had a bug where randomly, no matter what, it would just randomly have my screens cut to black. And it was only the game. It wasn't a problem with my computer. It wasn't a problem with GPU. I checked, and Linux has native crash stuff, so you can actually check the logs and all that. Nothing on there about GPU. It just stopped with. And after all this, the question remains: would I recommend Linux to someone who's thinking about switching to it as their main PC? If you're thinking about it as a side PC, the answer is yes. Because honestly, if you have your main one as Windows or Mac, and you have a side one, please note if you're using Mac as your side PC, it has to be Intel based. I think there's a project for Silicon based ones, but they aren't. I haven't really found it, but for Intel based Macs, this does apply. I would recommend for a side PC, yes, like it's a laptop or an old desktop that you use occasionally and you only need to browse the web and you don't really care about games. Perfect for it, honestly. It gives it probably another good 2 decades of use out of it, assuming you take care of it. For your higher end and your middle tier, if if you're someone who is a creative person and uses art all the time, whether 3D, 2D, or video, if it's not exclusively like Blender, Irrita that you use beforehand, I would say no. I would say stick with whatever you're using. Stick with Windows, stick with Apple. If
All
you
right.
if you're someone who
I've used all types of art stuff. I'm very experimental, so I still might be considering it for my main PC.
yeah, I was gonna say if you're video
Definitely
editing,
for my laptop on the side.
yeah, laptop on the side is perfect for it. Honestly, assuming it's
Yeah,
an act.
I'm 100% planning to do that.
But if you're someone who video edits a lot, there are video editing software on here. I don't know if DaVinci's here. I want to check. But there are several editing softwares on Linux. It's just they're not very. From what I've tried, they're not very good. Um, I my editing software is Final Cut Pro, and honestly, it is something I use a lot. And because it's Apple, I have to stick with Apple for that. Um, it is available. DaVinci Resolve is available on Linux, so if you want to do that, you could use DaVinci Resolve on Linux. And honestly, DaVinci, from what I have used a little bit, is perfectly fine. And for people who are still questioning should they switch, honestly, the answer is do you want to? Do you want to spend the hours it might take to get it running? It might take 5 minutes. It might take 3 hours. The installation process isn't a problem, it's the setup process that takes the most. Installation, like Windows, is plug and play no matter what. Well, unless of course you're using Triskel, but we're not talking about that one in this case. The other thing is, can you? If you can't, then don't. Alright, Palm, do you have any questions? Comments? Concerns?
Not really. It's been really informative. It was nice being able to ask questions and about like the things I was curious about.
Yeah, is there I'm asking, is there anything you, as someone who's debating about switching to Linux, would like to add to what I've said and
All
ask
right.
me?
Okay. So, would it be better to have a more simplistic uh, Linux on your side PC
Uh,
to
I
start
would
off?
I would say your first install of Linux should always be a simple one, unless if you're already super tech savvy and are willing to risk minor kernel panics.
All right. Okay. Next question. Uh, so is there like a way that you can easily tell if something can run on Linux?
Google it or search it up. If you are not sure, looking it up is the best way. Um, Most websites will advertise if they run on Linux or not. You can usually search. So I just searched up DaVinci Resolve earlier in this video. I said I wondered, hey, does it? What's the download support for it? The downloads show Windows, Mac, Linux, and iPad. So there you go. It's like, oh well, I know it runs on Linux, so I can do it. Now, whether it works perfectly, that's the other question. Because sometimes there are stuff that is supported in Ubuntu, but not in Fedora or Arch or Debian. Is there any other
All
questions?
right. Uh, Let me see. I think I had one, but if it was originally a gaming laptop, like it was built for gaming, would it be better to go with a beefier Linux or a more mild one?
Um, there are very few Linux that take up a lot of stop space, especially compared to Windows. I I would always recommend the only difference between a beefier version is how much stuff comes pre-installed usually. Usually they run about all the same. There's not a whole lot of like if I install Linux Mint on this PC, it would run about the same as if I with what the current installation of Linux I have is. It's not like Windows 10 and 11 where there's a huge spike in performance based on what one you use. It's like you're playing, you're going from a, a streetcar to another streetcar. You're not really, there's some differences, but it's not going to be noticeable unless if you're really into it.
All right, so that actually does answer some questions because for my laptop, I actually had upgraded it at one point to have like the 32 gigabytes of RAM, but I ended up not using it anymore because its disk speed was slowing down because it kept getting used up.
Oh, less than like the SSD or hard drive disk speed?
I believe so.
Okay, yeah. So usually with that, that's just a so that's more so a problem of the actual hard drive or the SSD being slowed down or being too full. Um, but again, when you install Linux, back up anything you want to save beforehand onto a separate drive, and then you will install it, and it will entirely erase everything on the drive. So if something doesn't work on it or your computer bugs out, that might be a problem. That might be a separate problem outside of whatever, you know, OS you're going to use.
Gotcha. That was the last of my questions that I can think of. If I have anything else, I could just message you, I think.
I was going to say, if you have anything else, I'll gladly answer you in private. I was just meaning more so for the video and all that, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think with that, we will be done. Unless if there's anything else you want me to say or ask.
Not really, no.
All right.